The Persona series has come a long way, especially if we look at the most recent mainline game, Persona 5 Royal. With Persona being a spin-off of the larger Megami Tensei series, which started with the original digital devil story, Megami Tensei. But even that game was based off of a trilogy of novels by Aya Nishitani, who would be a consultant for the video game adaptation. I don't want to go too deep into it right now, so maybe I'll go more in depth on the OG Megami Tensei games in another video. Anyway, the abridged version would be that one of the titles in the series, Shin Megami Tensei If, would lead to the creation of other sub-series of SMT, one of which starts with Megami Ibun Roku Persona. But let me ask you something. Since Persona is known for taking place in Japan, have you ever wished that there was a Persona game that took place in America? Well, this is the game for you. Sorta. By that I mean that the American localized version of the original Megami Ibun Roku Persona, or roughly Strange Tales of the Goddess Persona, it became Revelations Persona. And instead of bearing the Shin Megami Tensei or True Goddess's Reincarnation brand, they went with the Revelations brand in America, which they thought sounded cool, and it really worked out for them because it generated some marketing buzz. But you can tell that that was going to be their planned name change going forward by having series underneath the Revelations on the cover, as well as the title for Megami Tensei Gaiden becoming Revelations the Demon Slayer for the Western world. When the original game Megami Ibun Roku Persona was being localized for American audiences, there were some creative changes made. Some blatant examples are both the appearances and the names of the main characters, as well as the currency being converted from the Japanese yen to US dollars, and even different transition screens. The American version has a gold mask with a black background, with gold text that says "now loading." In order to play into the idea that this takes place in America, some changes had to be made. The nameable main character became a redhead with blue eyes, even though his hair color is still black in the intro. And also being limited to only one section for a name in the US version, but having the freedom to do a family name, a given name, and a nickname in the Japanese version, as well as lacking the signature pierced ear that his Japanese counterpart has. Kei Nanjo becomes Nate Trinity, and his hair changes from a shade of purple to a slightly dirty blonde. Eriko, or Eri/Ellie, her backstory changes from being a Japanese student that studied abroad in America to being an American student that studied abroad in Europe, and instead of having that dark reddish purple hair, becomes a blonde girl named Ellen. So that equivalence is still there in a sense. Mark, as he's actually known as in both versions of the game, was also changed to look different, sporting a different looking face and a lot more melanin on top of having a different hat. Maki becomes Mary and goes from having dark brown hair to light brown hair. That's it. But she too retains her design in the game's intro, with the only change being the translated passage by the Chinese philosopher Zhuangzi, but known as Soshi in Japanese. Now for these characters, other than name changes, they mostly have the same design. Brown becomes Brad, Yukino becomes Yuki, which is still a Japanese name, but they never really addressed that for her character backstory. So I guess in this case she's an American-born Japanese? But anyway, Ayase becomes Alana, then the secret party member Reiji becomes Chris. And even the main villain isn't safe, going from Takahisa Kandori to becoming Guido Sardinia, which, hey, I think is an improvement honestly. And a bunch of other name changes that I won't focus on in this video, including other characters or even the translation of the personas and their skill names, with all of the personalities of the characters, for the most part, remaining intact. The story too, aside from the name changes, is translated pretty decently from the Japanese version. There are some creative liberties taken with the translation, sure, but that's because the team focused more on localizing than translating, since the goal was to try to take a Japanese game and bring it into an American setting, fearing that the game being too Japanese would alienate American consumers because of cultural differences. With Atlas USA attempting to undertake the task to have an RPG foothold in America, like Square did with Final Fantasy, Konami with Suikoden, and Capcom with their Breath of Fire series, as well as opting to try to lower the barrier of entry by reducing the rate of enemy encounters and increasing the amount of experience points, thereby slightly decreasing the difficulty. But despite these attempts to Americanize the game, some Japanese influence remains, like some posters containing Japanese writing, the Satomi Tadashi pharmacy song that remains untranslated from Japanese, or even some background dialogue spoken in Japanese that you could pick out if you've heard the language before. Another instance of some references slipping through the cracks include the cover of the Japanese Sega Saturn exclusive Shin Megami Tensei Devil Summoner, and seemingly original artwork of Jack Frost and Pyrojack/Jack Lantern in the subway dungeon of the game. I say that because I haven't been able to find a reference for it like the Devil Summoner poster. It'd be nice to actually see a better quality render of it. But a big part of the game is the hidden second story known as the Snow Queen quest, which was removed from the English localization of the game, meaning there's a whole other story. We do gotta take into account though that this game was translated and localized by a fairly small team that were trying to get the game done for a holiday release, so they couldn't get to everything. And to translate another pretty big story would have added a whole bunch of workload on top of what the team already had to do, which would have been a daunting task, especially since RPGs are text heavy. This quest wouldn't be normally playable by English-speaking audiences until the PSP remake Shin Megami Tensei Persona, which released in 2009, with Atlus USA actually releasing a video celebrating its inclusion in this new version. The game would be directed by the known SMT and Persona composer Shoji Meguro, who actually also helped compose for the original PlayStation version as well, sporting a strikingly different soundtrack from the original as well, with a J-pop infused soundtrack, which makes sense given the successes of Persona 3 and 4 and its work on those games during the time. I personally enjoy both for different reasons, but it's okay to have a preference for which OST you think is better between the PlayStation original version and the portable remake. So if you want to enjoy a decent story with the original Japanese soundtrack and a 90s perspective of if Persona were to take place in America, Revelations Persona is there, because it's certainly an experience. But the PSP remake is more faithful to the original in tone, albeit with a soundtrack that differs from the original version, added cutscenes, and does offer a better gameplay experience. My only issue with the PSP remake is not including the original OST as an option at the very least. Other than that, it's the definitive way to experience Persona 1. But that's going to be it for this video. Hope you enjoyed it. Remember to be your true mind, and until the next one, take care.